cynical kind of mood. Like, does this man really exist who wrote these books? They were just so transcendental. I just couldn't even believe it was somebody on this planet. Yet everybody in the temple knew him. They were all the ISKCON Press devotees. They were all in Boston. They all knew him. And so, but still I doubted. Is this man really here? And so until the day I met him, I had this doubt. Is he going to really walk through those doors? So the day before I got initiated, we had just gotten to New York. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. We missed his arrival at the airport because our temple president, Damodar, felt that our business wasn't just to go and gawk at him. He wanted us to stay out on Sankirtan and just go up there just to get initiated, and that's it. So the night before, Prabhupada was giving Bhagavad Gita classes every night because in the morning he had initiation every morning for a week. So he wasn't giving class. He was just doing the initiation. So the night before, I go into the temple room. It's a hot July night, packed with devotees. And I'm just sitting there looking at the door, waiting for him to come through. And I remember that Kirti Raj Prabhu was going around and tapping devotees on the shoulder and saying, "Can you leave? Because there's not enough room for everybody, and there's still people in the hallway that never saw Prabhupada." And he asked me that, and I had never seen Prabhupada. Prabhupada had been there for a couple of days, but I had just arrived. And when he said that to me, I didn't budge. I'm just staying here. I'm going to see Srila Prabhupada. And because I stayed put, sure enough, within a matter of time, Prabhupada walked through the door, and all those doubts that I had had went completely out the window. And it was like seeing an old friend I hadn't seen in so long. So that was my experience of seeing Srila Prabhupada the first time. He was an old, old friend, and I'd just forgotten about him.
In the couple of months before we met Srila Prabhupada, when Gary and I were living in Haight-Ashbury area, there were some flyers that were distributed. And they said things like, "The Swami is coming to town. Chant and be high forever," this sort of thing. I'm sure you've heard of them. And I remember Gary looking at one of these flyers that said, "The Swami is coming to town," and him saying, "Well, when this Swami comes to town, we'll go see him and we'll do whatever he says to do." It's just, the whole thing was such a mystical, incredible experience in that we were actually very well situated at miles away, 1,500 miles away in Texas, and we were drawn there. And I think this is true of many other people. So then we went to Frederick Street and found out about when the classes were and so forth. Made an appointment with Srila Prabhupada, and Mukunda Das, who later became Mukunda Goswami, arranged for us to visit Srila Prabhupada. So in our first meeting with him, private meeting with him, he took us up to his apartment. I remember waiting pensively to meet Srila Prabhupada. He brought us in, and Srila Prabhupada was sitting in, those little bay windows that they have in San Francisco, these apartments with bay windows. He was sitting in sunlight, looking very effulgent and very peaceful. And he sat in a chair, and there was another chair opposite. I think he sat in the lounge chair, and I sat in the rocking chair, or vice versa. I can't remember that one point, but we were opposite one another. And Gary, sat on the floor. And he began to ask us questions all about our lives, what we were doing, who we were, where we had come from. He was very personally interested in us. And I mean, he was very personally interested in each of his disciples, each of his students. But he asked us, if we were students, what we were studying. We told him we had been studying art and that we were artists. He asked about our parents, our family, so many things. In the course of the conversation, I told him that I had studied art in Europe and that I had traveled all over Europe and studied in various places. And he was quite surprised. He raised his eyes and said, "Oh, you have traveled so much?" Because I was very young. I looked like I was 16. I was actually 19 or 20. And I said, Yes, Srila Prabhupada. Yes, he wasn't called Prabhupada yet. Yes, but none of it has made me happy. And he smiled and said, that is required. To actually be disgusted with material life.
When Prabhupada did the initiation, we sat on the floor with Prabhupada. I got initiated with Jayatirtha was there. Ujjvala got initiated at the same time. Can't remember the others. Anyhow, Prabhupada sat on the floor. We watched him chant on the beads. He did the fire sacrifice. And then when he came around to giving us our names, and he came to me and he was going to give me my beads and my name, and he goes, your name is Tulsi Das. And somehow or other I got some kind of look on my face like, or whatever. And Prabhupada looks at me and he goes, is that all right? And I said, oh yes, Prabhupada. And I was so shocked because I was just a new devotee and I hardly recognized any of the names, but I knew the name Tulsi Das because we'd done the Tulsi worship and all that. So that was kind of my first real kind of personal interaction with Prabhupada.
When I went up to the Vyasa when they called my name, Aravinda was sitting to Prabhupada's side, and he would say the name first. And when you're that close to Prabhupada, you could hear the name before Prabhupada said it. So I was already kind of bowled over by the name Mahamaya. And then Prabhupada said it, and there was this sort of shocked silence in the temple room. And then Prabhupada cracked up and started laughing. So then everyone laughed, including myself. And then he said something like, the illusory energy is not all bad. He said, for one who does not want to serve Krishna, the illusory energy is there. And he gave the example of the moon. There are phases of the moon, and Mahamaya was a phase of Radharani's energy. So I don't remember him handing me back my beads or anything, but I just remember that experience of being in front of him, and I felt like he was seeing me, not the layers of false ego that I thought I was, but he was just seeing the soul, and it was just such a wonderful experience. He definitely was like lifting me up to his platform, and just, it was just really a nice exchange, Prabhupada.
At the time of the initiation, there were no saris, there were no social customs, none of these things. And I had been an art student, and art students wear jeans. So I was actually initiated in blue jeans. Well, actually they were beige jeans with paint stains on them. It didn't seem to matter to Srila Prabhupada, but that was what our life was like at that time. When I tell people I was initiated in jeans, they're just amazed. But most of us, we didn't know what saris were yet. So during my initiation, I remember watching the ceremony and seeing him putting the flower, putting the colored dyes, and putting the, making the fire, building the fire. And I remember thinking, what is this? What is the depth of the meaning of this? What is really going on? In other words, I didn't have the kind of, I didn't have the background. I mean, there was no Bhagavad Gita printed yet, for one thing. The only thing we had were Prabhupada's 3 books. So we did read those right away. And the first job that he gave us was painting a great big 4-foot by 4-foot Radha Krishna painting. But during my initiation, I had some misgivings. So then after the initiation, I went to see Srila Prabhupada, and I went upstairs to visit him. And I told him that I didn't feel liberated. I thought that when I got initiation, by golly, it was going to be nirvana immediately. I was going to be liberated. And he was very patient with me. He said, yes, just see the fan over here. There was a fan sitting in the corner. If I unplug it, it may spin a few more times. But because it has been unplugged, it will stop eventually. So it's like that. Your material life, although it may not cease immediately, because it has been unplugged, it will spin a few more times. But just do the process as I told you. So he explained it very beautifully, very gently.
One experience I had at that time, I'd studied the pronunciation for the Sri Upanishad with Pradumna in New York, but I only knew the first 6 verses. Now it's said that the Guru knows everything about the disciple, he knows everything. So he's expert in engaging the disciple and using anything the disciple has to offer. The pure devotee is expert in using that and engaging it. So I only knew these 6 verses, and an impersonal Mayavadi Swami came to visit Prabhupada at Berry Place. So when he came in, Prabhupada gave him all respects and had me put a cushion down for him. And then he said, please go make up a fruit plate. And I ran down and made up a fruit plate and came up. And I went over to Prabhupada to offer it to him first. And he said, no, offer it to our guest. And I went over and offered it to the Swami. And I came back to offer it to Prabhupada, and he said, sit down. I thought, okay. So I sat down. Prabhupada looked at the sannyasi, the Swami, and he said, my boys all know Sanskrit. And I thought, oh no, what is he up to now? And he was beaming, and he looked at me and he said, chant Sri Upanishad. And so I started chanting, Ong Purnam Adak Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachite Purnasya Purnamada, in perfect meter, and I'm as best I could. So I get up to the 4th verse, and I'm thinking, Prabhupada, I only know 6. But I kept going, I had faith. And I got up to the fifth verse, and I was really sweating, but I kept going. And when I started on the 6th verse, I felt like Drupadi, about to come unraveled. And I was mentally saying to Prabhupada, I only know 6. I only know 6. And when I got on the 2nd line of the 6th verse, Prabhupada looked at me just as I was finishing. He went, that will be enough. You can go now. So he used, even though I only had that much knowledge, he used it perfectly, and got the maximum value out of my very little bit of knowledge, So that was a very nice experience.
At the pandal, there was a pandal set up for every night. And the most significant thing that I remember was after Prabhupada gave his lecture, he asked for questions, and one man came up to the microphone, and he was challenging, and he said, can you show me a miracle? And of course we were all thinking of Sai Baba or these other gurus who, can produce ashes in their hands and things like that. And that's probably what he was demanding, can you do something like that? Maybe he even mentioned that, I don't remember exactly, but Prabhupada just looked at the 150 of us sitting on the stage in front of him and just swooped his hand in front to indicate us and said, this is my miracle. I have changed these Malechas and Yavanas into Vaishnavas. And we were all cheering, Hari Bol, Jai. We were just so happy to be his examples, and his examples of success.
Srila Prabhupada immediately engaged us as artists. He knew that we were art students before, so his very first project was to have me paint a great big 4-foot by 4-foot painting of Radha Krishna from the cover of his Srimad Bhagavatam. Then he had me paint a great big 4-foot by 3-foot painting of him sitting on the Vyasasana with a painting of Lord Chaitanya dancing in Sankirtan party hanging behind him in the picture that I painted, and specifically with Lord Chaitanya's foot touching his head. So those are the paintings that he started us on. And what I found so significant in this is that Srila Prabhupada engaged people in the work for which they had a natural propensity. He always found, and this gave the person a taste for devotional service because they already had that inclination.
In the course of the morning walk, I'd have to say that in my mind throughout the walk, I was scheming, how is it that I could get up front? That's all I could think about. And I'd be constantly scheming how to maneuver myself in a situation where I could, get there and say something maybe, because I felt that I'd never get this opportunity again. I really strongly felt that. In the course of the walk, there was one devotee that was asking Prabhupada a lot of questions. And very intimate questions of Radha and Krishna pastimes and the gopis. Prabhupada answered, but it wasn't very exciting. It wasn't enlivening. Prabhupada, he would answer the question, but then he wouldn't say much. And he would just, continue chanting his japa. And this devotee was very persistent in his questioning. And Prabhupada was very nice. He didn't say, he didn't exhibit any, anger or anything of that nature. But it didn't seem like it was very exciting, like what I thought a morning walk was going to be like. Very exciting and powerful, and a lot of nice Krishna conscious nectar. Although that was nectar, but it just didn't seem like Srila Prabhupada was really absorbed in it. So the morning walk that day wasn't very far. It wasn't a very long distance that Prabhupada walked. It was like maybe a big parking lot, I believe, if I can recall properly. And we walked, and you got to the end of the park, and there was a row of trees there. Turned around, and then kind of came back. So we came to that particular point to turn around, and I became very, very nervous because I thought I only had so much time left to be able to approach Srila Prabhupada and say something. So throughout the whole walk back, as I was scheming, how am I going to do this? I was trying to develop enough nerve and courage to get there. So finally I just made up my mind. I thought, I got to do this. I cannot, hesitate. I'll never get this opportunity again. So I really built myself up with courage and determination, and I zipped through all the sannyasis. It's a pretty good quantity of them. So I kind of zigzagged through the crowd. And of course, trying to get through the crowd, I had to exert a certain amount of energy. The excitement of doing that, the fear of offending Prabhupada, the fear of not saying anything that would be significant, that would even be, noticeable was all. So all these emotions were in there, and so obviously when I ran through the crowd, I was so excited that practically, at the top of my voice, I would say, I yelled out, "Srila Prabhupada!" And it was so startling that Prabhupada just stopped, right in the middle of the street there, and all the devotees just became, paralyzed. They didn't know what was going on. They thought it was some crazy thing or crazy guy. So everybody stopped, Prabhupada stopped, and he looked at me, and I just, out of complete anxiety, just started saying all kinds of stuff. Srila Prabhupada, we just want to please you. We're distributing books at O'Hare Airport, and then I started telling how many books are being distributed and how we're doing it. And, I just wanted to make sure I threw in everything. I didn't want to miss anything. So I'd said everything I could say, and I just kept saying over and over, we just want to please you, Srila Prabhupada, and, this is for you. And, just all kinds of statistics of devotees doing books there. And Srila Prabhupada just, looked at me throughout the whole thing, and I'm sure it wasn't very long. I'm sure it was just a matter of seconds, but, it meant like minutes to me, and my throat became like really choked up. I couldn't talk anymore, and, my mouth became dry. I recall at one point that all I could hear was my heart, beating immensely. I mean, just fast, and God, I just more or less said everything, and then I was just finished. I just kind of like stood there before Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, he was very merciful, he was very kind, and he was very peaceful and calm, because he could see I was very excited, and, and Prabhupada was very calming, and he said, "Thank you very much." He said, "Thank you." And then what was really shocking at that particular point was Prabhupada, in a very calm, demeanor, very, very wonderful, and just trying to encourage me. He turned around and looked at all the devotees that were on the morning walk. He just faced them, and he said, "Just see, this is my real devotee." And he was referring, of course, to book distribution. So that was very meaningful for me. I think on that particular day, I didn't realize at that particular time what that was because I was just overwhelmed with so many emotions. But I do recall that after the morning walk and going back and just trying to think about what actually happened there, it really, it meant my life. That was my life after that, I felt. I felt this was an instruction from Srila Prabhupada. It was to me, I felt, you know, although I'm sure he was referring to more than just me, but I felt that it was something that Srila Prabhupada was telling me, and it meant everything for me. So even up to this point, so many years later, I consider that to be the most important, you know, instruction or event in my life in Krishna consciousness.
Another very significant thing happened in Boston. Swamiji became Srila Prabhupada. The way this happened was that Gorsinder was studying Hindi and he was studying Sanskrit, and he was studying various forms of address, and Ji is an affectionate friendship form of address, and this is all very new to us. So I was sitting in Srila Prabhupada's room and taking dictation, as I often did, and Gorsinder was at the doorway, and he said, Swamiji, is it okay if I call Govinda Dasi Govindaji? And Prabhupada, Swamiji said, no, Ji is a very third-class form of address. It should not. And so I said, well, then why are we calling you Swamiji if it's a third-class form of address? And he said, not very important. I said, no, it is very important. We want to know what is the best thing we can call you. And Swamiji said, well, you could call me Gurudev or Guru Maharaj or Srila Prabhupada. And I said, well, which one is the best of those three? If you give me three, I don't know which one. So you pick the best one that you want to be called. And Swamiji said, Srila Prabhupada is nice. I said, okay, from today you will be called Srila Prabhupada. And so I told all the devotees, and everyone started calling him Srila Prabhupada from that day. He was no longer Swamiji.
When I arrived in Mayapur, it was just before the festival. And I had just come from Brazil. We just opened a temple there in the BBT, and I was a young brahmachari and young. And in those days, when you're a brahmachari and you're preaching and opening centers, sometimes you get distracted, and what you want to do. I wanted to become a sannyasi. I don't know if it was because of the Mahaprasadam, or not really, because I was kind of getting that anyways. But I wanted to do it, I think, because like everyone else, you want to grow and get more prominence, so Prabhupada will see you. And I think, that was why everybody wanted it. Unfortunately, in my case, there were other things that I wanted beneath the surface as well. But at that time, I was on the list to be recommended for sannyas that year. And I was going to Mayapur. I was going with Hridayananda Maharaj. And when we arrived in Mayapur, it was the first time I'd ever been to India. And I remember sitting down in the Prasadam hall and just looking at how incredible this place was. How huge and how beautiful. And just, its presence and its power was just... and I thought to myself, I think I said it out loud, which was the mistake. In Mayapur, I said, boy, would I love to manage this place. And Jayapataka Maharaj was sitting next to me, and I wasn't aware of even who he was at the time. And I know, and then that evening, I got called into Prabhupada's room. Now, in Mayapur, on the first floor, Prabhupada stayed on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, the sannyasis and GBC stayed. And I stayed in one of those rooms with Tamal Maharaj, Hridayananda Maharaj, I think Jagadish Prabhu was there, and I was taking care of them, and I was staying in the room. And it was late in the night, and Hari Sori Prabhu came in and said, Prabhupada, would like to see you. So I went in, and when I went in the room, there was Sri Dayananda Maharaj, Jayapataka Maharaj, and Srila Prabhupada. And so Prabhupada said to me, "So, you'd like to stay here?" And I was just overwhelmed that a question was even being directed at me. And I said yes. So they talked about it a bit. Prabhupada had said to me that he wanted Bhavananda to travel on a boat that they had recently acquired up and down the Ganges preaching, that Jayapataka Maharaj, he wanted him to preach to important politicians and important Indians, and they would need help in the management in Mayapur. And being that I was a Canadian, which in those days I think helped visa-wise, and that I was a manager, I was being targeted to stay and help in Mayapur. And I was thinking, what will Brazil do? After I walked out of the room, it hit me, I'm not in Brazil anymore. And in Brazil, I was kind of like, I was on my own. I was the big, honcho. And it started to actually weigh on me what I just said yes to. And so it got really heavy. It got heavier and heavier to the point where I changed my mind. And I went to, I can't remember how many times I went back in and asked Prabhupada if I could go back to Brazil, and how many times it kind of went back and forth. I think the first time maybe even Hridayananda Maharaj went in and said something, and then Prabhupada had agreed, and he came out and said, okay, you don't have to stay, you can go back. But then that night, I got asked back into his room again. So Prabhupada looked at me and he said, so have you made your mind up yet? And I was under the impression I was already, released. And I just said, so he says, do you want to stay? So I couldn't say no. I couldn't say no to him. I knew it was a no-no, that you're supposed to do what he asked you to do. So I kept saying yes. And then I'd walk out of the room, and then it would hit me again. And I'd just get over, and every day was this constant. And at nighttime, and then I started going back in and saying, Srila Prabhupada, I don't know what they're going to do in Brazil. There's a BBT, the temples. No one has any experience. I'm the only devotee there who's had any experience with the movement. There's 40, 50 people there already. So I need to go back. And he wouldn't budge. I guess he had plans for someone else to go and take care of it already. And he kept insisting, that I stay. And every time he would call me back in, he would ask me if I would stay, and I'd say yes, and I'd go back out completely overwhelmed, come back and ask if I could leave. He'd say okay. That night he'd call me back in again, ask me again if I'd made my mind up yet. So finally on one day during his massage, I went up to his room and had asked him, could I go back? And he said, he was sitting having his massage, Harisori Prabhu was there, and he turned to me and, just so kind, he said, in the spiritual world, we all have different relationships with Krishna, so, it's okay, you can go back to Brazil.
We were at New Jersey in the spring of 1968, after Srila Prabhupada's stroke. We were living there for 3 weeks. It was at that time that Gorsinder received his call to the draft. So he had to have an appointment in New York and it was a very great likelihood that he would be drafted into the army. Naturally, we were in a lot of anxiety about this because Gorsinder didn't want to fight a war that he didn't believe in and that Srila Prabhupada also did not support. So the day came for Gorsinder to go for his draft appointment in New York. And he was in anxiety, and as he bowed down to leave, Swamiji said to him, don't worry, Krishna will protect you. He will take care of everything. So he was gone the whole day by train to New York, and I know during the day Srila Prabhupada mentioned him several times, so he was thinking of him. Then in the evening, we heard him coming up the stairs, and he had a big smile on his face. He was very happy. And so as soon as he came in, Swamiji called him to his room. What happened? And he explained that He had a silken cord with the Lord Jagannath on his neck, a murti of Lord Jagannath about 3 inches high. And he also had his big red chanting beads. And the doctors there had never seen such odd things. So they had given him a 3Y based on not being a psychiatrically competent for the army. And so Srila Prabhupada said, yes, just see, Krishna will protect. If we are sincere, he will make all arrangements. He will protect us. And you have chosen Krishna's service, not the army service, so Krishna has arranged everything perfectly.
So I was in LA, that was, and I started telling President in LA. And then Prabhupada came to LA, I don't know, maybe after Rath Yatra that year. That was 1974. So Prabhupada comes, and of course I'm the TP, so I get to go in the morning walks, I get to go in the garden and everything. So Prabhupada had just been there, just gotten there, and we were having one of those evening kind of things in the, the little garden back in LA. And there was quite a few devotees all sitting around, and I was kind of, Jayatirtha was by Prabhupada, and I just come in, and Jayatirtha goes, Prabhupada, I'd like to introduce you to our new temple president here in LA, Tulsidas. So Prabhupada looks at me and he goes, oh, I know Tulsidas. So my heart, I'm going, oh, great. Prabhupada knows me. Prabhupada really recognizes me. I was, this is happening in a nanosecond, but I'm really feeling, like really good. I know Tulsidas. And then he goes, and why did you leave Bombay? So I went from like this way up here to like, I just went crashing to the bottom, and my mind was just trying to find, what am I going to say? And my heart was beating up, and I started to make some excuses. Well, I was having some trouble with the management, or I was doing this or that. And finally I just went, and I looked at Prabhupada, straight in Prabhupada's eyes, and I said, Srila Prabhupada, I was in Maya. And Prabhupada said, yes. And then he went on to give this whole lecture about, how powerful Maya is and everything. But it was a highlight moment for me, that moment in the garden in LA.
And this was at the time when he was visiting Hawaii. And at that time, there were several disciples who were by nature, very intelligent and charismatic, and had misled some of the more simple folk, simple-minded devotees. And I was in a lot of anxiety about it, because I felt extremely protective of the devotees, having been the first devotee in Hawaii. They were like my children, sort of. So I was very protective, and I was very anxious about it. So I was explaining to Prabhupada how such and such, these people are, they're misleading him in this way and in that way, and changing the philosophy and so forth. And Prabhupada very calmly looked at me and said, the mouse respects the cat, and the cat respects the dog respects the wolf, and the wolf respects the tiger. But we see they are all animals. In other words, from his perspective, all of us, all of these people that he's having to deal with on this planet are really on the level of animals. And if we realize that, we won't get too puffed up. If we realize that we're really coming from very, very low-grade backgrounds, he's coming from Krishnaloka. There's no chance of our getting so puffed up that we think that we can outguess him, edit him, change his ideas about things, think we could do better. It's impossible. We can't. He can outguess. I saw so many instances of this. Unfortunately, one very close to home instance was my own husband, who I loved very much, Gorsundar. He was brilliant. He was very educated, He was studying Sanskrit and Bengali, and he did the transliteration for Chaitanya Charitamrita, the first part of it. And he was a very nice devotee. He used to take Prabhupada on walks every day, and he did the massage every day. I give him all credit for all the wonderful service that he did. But later on he left, and Prabhupada made the comment to me, even though he knew I was quite attached, many times he said, Gaursunder is suffering from too much intelligence. He has the disease of being too intelligent. He thinks he knows more than his guru. And this was Gaursunder's flaw. He was very, very brilliant in every respect. But as soon as a person thinks they know more than their guru, then the fall down begins.
Early, around 72, I'd been preparing for sannyas for about, it was a little later than that. What was it? Anyway, it was early 70s. I'm not sure of the date, but I'd been preparing for sannyas, and Srila Prabhupada was, he was treating me very special. We were going on the morning walk. I got to go on all the morning walks, and he would give me special attention and talk to me. And I remember one day, as I was on a morning walk with him, and as I'm looking at him, his skin looked like silk. It was like he revealed an energy to me, but his skin went from being flesh to being just golden silk. It was very beautiful. And I got myself all prepared and, shaved up and fresh cloth. And I went to Shyam Sundar and I said, Shyam Sundar, I'd like to see Srila Prabhupada. And he said, well, why do you want to see Srila Prabhupada? And this is when Shyam Sundar had just been made GBC. So I said, well, I want to ask him for sannyas. And he said, well, Kulashekhar, he said, you really think you want to take sannyas? And I said, yeah, I've been preparing for it for years, and I'm very ready. Shyam Sundar said, well, do you ever think of marriage? I said, yeah, well, He said, do you ever think of sex? Do you ever think of marriage? I said, well, sometimes the thought crossed my mind. I said, but I don't pay any attention to it. So he said, well, look, Kulashekhar, he said, maybe you should get married. I said, what? He said, yeah. He said, maybe you should get married. He said, look, this is a big decision. He said, this is for the rest of your life. He said, go away and think about it. He said, because if you ever think of sex, you shouldn't take sannyas. So I went away and thought about it that night, all night long. Didn't sleep much that night, I remember. And of course, trying to be truthful with myself, I thought, well, sometimes I do think of sex life, and it does cross my mind, and maybe I'm being just totally, false. I should probably get married. Well, then I started thinking, well, who do I want to marry? So I started thinking about all the different brahmacharinis and which one was the best one for me to marry. And anyway, I'd already gone through the complete ceremony, more or less. So I went back to Shyam Sundar the next morning and I said, Shyam Sundar, I said, I think you're right. I think I should probably get married. He said, well, who would you want to marry? And I told him the name of the girl, and he said, oh, that's a good choice. Yeah, he said, you can go in and see Srila Prabhupada. He said, just knock on the door. So I said, great. So I knocked on the door, and I opened the door, came in, and Prabhupada was beaming at me, beaming. And I paid obeisances, and I got up and I sat there, and Prabhupada said, yes. I said, Srila Prabhupada, I'd like to get married. And he went, what? What? He said, who has done this to you? And I was devastated. He said, who has done this to you? And I said, well, Prabhupada, I went to see Shamsuna, and he went, Shamsuna! And he looked at Pradumna and he pointed, he said, Pradumna, he said, get Shamsuna in here immediately. Prabhupada was furious. And I sat there, I felt like a dog. I was looking at the floor and I was like devastated. So Shamsuna comes in and sits down. And Prabhupada said, who are you to tell my brahmachari to get married? Who are you? And Shamsuna said, well, Prabhupada, he said he wanted to take sannyas. And I told him if he ever thinks of sex life, Prabhupada said, everyone with a material body thinks of sex life. He said, look at him. He's finished. And Prabhupada looked at me with such compassion. He said, look at him. He's finished. He said, you have no right to tell my brahmacharis to get married, ever. That was, I don't remember much after that.
I'd kind of been wanting to get married for some time. Actually, in LA, but some things, it never worked out in LA. Anyhow, so at that time, Prabhupada was practically giving sannyas, it seemed like, to everybody. People that he seemed like kind of like a mercy gift, like Guru Das. Not that I'm saying anything bad, but he was like giving all these people. So, although in my heart I didn't really buy into it, between Rameshwar, mainly Rameshwar, and maybe Gopa Vrindapal or a couple others, they were convincing me, you should take sannyas, you should take sannyas. So we were in this kind of darshan with Prabhupada. There were probably 30 devotees. I was probably 15 feet back from Prabhupada. Jayatirtha was right beside me. Rameshwar was standing behind Prabhupada. And so he's standing behind, there was kind of a lull in the discussion. And Rameshwar catches my eyes and he goes, so I know what he means. So I kind of stammer, Srila Prabhupada? He goes, yes. I don't know, I've been talking with some of the devotees and I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but there's a thought that maybe it'd be a good move or a good thing for me to take sannyas. So Prabhupada said, well, how long have you been a brahmachari? And I said, 5 years. And he said, oh, very nice. And then he said, what about the fire? Or he said, what about the butter? He said either one of those things. I think, let's just say he said, what about the butter? And I was kind of going, what about the butter? I'm going, and Jayatirtha whispers to me, he goes, the women, fire, butter. So instead of being truthful with Prabhupada and saying, listen, Prabhupada, I'd really like to have some female association and all that goes with it. I said, Prabhupada, as long as I'm traveling and preaching, everything is fine. That's a little bit of a thing. So Prabhupada said, okay, so you can take sannyas. So I said, oh, so should we bring my name up then at this Mayapur and then I wait a year? And he says, no, you take this year. Holy shit! Holy, what am I going to do? So I'm really at a, kind of like, he's already told me I'm going to take sannyas. This is like in in a few months' time. So I'm looking around for like, well, what am I going to do? Because I don't vision myself like any of these other sannyasis. So at this same time, Prabhupada, I think, went to Hawaii after leaving LA, and they had that boat there that they wanted, but nobody could skip it or anything. And I love the water. My sun and moon are in Pisces. I've always lived on the water. I just love the water, and I thought, ooh, this is a nice idea. So I wrote up a whole proposal of like a traveling Sankirtan party on a boat. And I'd even gone and seen this schooner, this big Gloucester schooner, 120 foot, and Guy was going to train us on how to do it, and we had a whole program, and Rameshwar was behind it for book distribution. And because I knew I better find something to do if I'm going to take sannyas, because I'm not just going to go around to temples and give lectures, I was a manager. So I could see me managing the boat and on the boat and, you know, coming into the town, and it would have been fun. And it seemed like it was something Prabhupada wanted. So I wrote him this whole big thing about my idea and preaching with the boat. And he wrote back this little short paragraph, why waste time sailing, better to fly instead. So I took, okay, I got it. Anyhow, Rameshwar really liked the idea. He really, really, really liked the idea, because I think it was the heyday of book distribution and the Sankirtan. This would be connected with the LA temple, so it'd be another feather in the LA temple growing, you know, empire there, which it was big. Everything was there at that time practically. Fate was there, and all the artists and all that kind of thing. Anyhow, so I took it fine. Prabhupada said, you know, all right, what am I going to do? I still got sannyas looking at me. So anyhow, in some long-distance calls between Rameshwar and Harikesh, Prabhupada was in Bombay translating. Rameshwar is talking to Harikesh, and he's trying to get Harikesh to bring this idea up again, that this is a good idea, and the boat and everything, and da. So anyhow, I guess Harikesh did me a real favor. And when he was explaining to Prabhupada, I guess, about the boat, and, you know, like maybe I don't know what happened, because nobody would tell me, but Prabhupada asked, well, why is he so anxious for doing this? I wasn't anxious for doing it, but Prabhupada asked that. So I think Harikesh said something like, well, Prabhupada, you know, he's in LA, and there's all these women around, and, you know, he's agitated or whatever, and this would be a good way, he'll always be out. And anyhow, so Prabhupada writes this scathing letter. Didn't even write it to me. He writes it to Rameshwar, who wouldn't even show it to me for years. I've got a copy of the letter now. And it's in it, Prabhupada just, he just saved me. He said, what a, you know, rascal, lowest of mankind, fool, you know, bad example, taking sannyas, all this kind of stuff. And Rameshwar was so afraid that I'd freak out if I saw it, he wouldn't even show it to me. He had Jayatirtha break the news to me in a gentle way. But the minute I heard that Prabhupada had said that basically I couldn't take sannyas, I just felt saved. So I was duplicitous with my spiritual master. I was, you know, in Laguna Beach, when I had told him, as long as I'm traveling and preaching, then I'm fine. And by his grace, he straightened it out. And the minute that letter came, in the core of my being, I was so thankful. I was relieved, because I had done something stupid. I did stupid first thing. I'd asked to take sannyas. And the second stupid thing was not being just straightforward with Prabhupada. If I'd have said, Prabhupada, well, I'm really, you know, not really thinking I'm sannyas material, but this has come up, and I really would like to get married and have a really nice wife, he'd have probably, I would imagine, instructed me down those lines. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, but I didn't give him the chance to, I didn't give him the information to kind of give me the instruction.
As they were leaving, she said, should we leave too, Srila Prabhupada? And he said, not unless you have some questions. And we both go, no, we don't have any questions. We both offer obeisances at the same time. Actually, we did have questions. So as we both get up from paying obeisances, we simultaneously start asking questions. Anyway, I let her go first. She asked a question. She said, Srila Prabhupada, I heard that in yesterday's darshan, you said that a sannyasi's business is to preach. Brahmachari's business is to assist the sannyasis. And the householder, the grihasta's business, is to do deity worship. So what about us brahmacharinis? Can we do deity worship? And actually we were doing a lot of deity worship. We were doing most of the deity worship in Bombay at the time for Radha Rasa Bihari in the old temple. And he said, yes, you can also do deity worship. So she was satisfied with her answer. So then I asked my question. This is a question I had been thinking for a long time. And what I wanted to ask and what I did ask were two different things. I had heard from my friend Chintamani Prabhu that he had given her instructions to worship Lord Jagannath because her husband was Sudama and he had taken sannyas. And there was a deity of Lord Jagannath in Japan. I believe they were installed, but they were her deities. He told her on two different occasions to make Jagannath your husband, Subhadra your daughter, and Balaram your son. It's a very personal instruction. And then I also knew from Nandalal Prabhu that he had given her a deity of Krishna right off his desk. He had given her a deity and told her to worship this deity. I think it was a silver deity of Lord Krishna that someone had given him, and it was on his desk in Los Angeles. So I knew about these two ladies, and they were both in a renounced position. One, the husband took sannyas, the other was older and didn't want to get married. And I was thinking, I was very old. I was 29. And I was thinking I was very old and I wasn't going to get married. And so I was thinking I was like them and I wanted instruction like them. But yet I didn't really have that close a personal relationship with Prabhupada. So I wanted to ask, can I have my own deity? And I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I had to say, Srila Prabhupada, can devotees have their own deities? And his answer was, no. And then he said, because that will distract from the temple deity. So I took that instruction to mean that if you're going to get absorbed in your own deity worship, then you don't want to take the time to worship the temple deity. And that was the main lesson.
One incident took place with me and Srila Prabhupada, and this was in Los Angeles in September of 1968. We were going to record the record album, the Govinda record album. And so early in the morning, he wanted to use his spiritual master's preface to Brahma Samhita. The materialistic demeanor cannot stretch to the transcendental. You know the one I'm talking about. Anyway, he wanted to use that, so he asked me to type it up. I think he wrote it out or something and asked me to. So I typed it up, typewriter, we use typewriters and this. And he read it to me a couple of times to practice because we were going to the recording studio around 9 in the morning, 9 or 10, fairly early. And we were going to record this this talk and the Govinda record. I think it's called the Govinda record, right? You know the one I mean. So he read it to me and I listened very carefully. He would read things to me and see how does this sound, just because I knew English, fairly well. And so he read it to me and there was one word that he pronounced differently from what is customarily pronounced in the English language. That word is analogously. And so I never corrected Srila Prabhupada before. In fact, I loved it that he called watermelons water lemons. When he would ask me for water lemon, I never said, oh, Prabhupada, that's called watermelon. And when he called for some antelope, I never told him that's called cantaloupe. I was fine with that. I had a very motherly relationship with Prabhupada. I thought he was just whatever he said was wonderful. If the sky was striped pink, green, and orange, fine. But because I was thinking that other people are going to hear this, and this is for all posterity, and they may not understand his accent, and he's pronouncing this word analogously, and they may not understand what that means. So I had very good intentions. My intentions were very innocent. I was not on any kind of ego trip. I was simply thinking, oh, you want your guru to become the best foot forward type thing, So I said, Srila Prabhupada, I think that word is pronounced analogously. He looked at me and said, You pronounce it your way, and I'll pronounce it my way.
I probably got the most severe chastising of my life, which till today helps me. I feel at that time is where I really made contact with Srila Prabhupada as my father. I was watching the other day, you were showing the tapes, and Guru Kripa Prabhu was expressing how he got chastised and how Prabhupada sent him out of the room like a kid. Boy, could I relate to that. I was in Mayapur. It was during this time, and I think it was right after the first day that he had asked me to help the management. So I really didn't get any instruction from anybody on what to do or where to go. So I just immediately took charge, which is, so I set up my little office in a corner somewhere they gave me, immediately went out and started doing what I thought is what I do, right? What I was doing was changing everything he had done. And I was changing the cleanup, and I was changing, I was just out there creating havoc. And he came back on that morning walk, and he went into the room, into the temple room, to Guru Puj, and the floors were wet because I'd changed everything, and so the system wasn't working. And I was somewhere upstairs, I think maybe changing something else, and he was going up the stairs to his room, and I was starting to come down the stairs, and I had this big smile on my face, and I was expecting some kind of, glorification or something, and he pointed his cane at me, and he looked at me, and he said, "Who do you think you are? You're the king?" And he started just chastising me, and I had an out-of-body experience out of embarrassment, because it was just a few days before the Mayapur festival. Everybody was in town. All the older, devotees who, I always look up to as, your older god brothers, and I was just so embarrassed, and they were all standing there looking at me too. I didn't know where to go, so I just went up to a cloud, was watching the conversation. I was just young, and I had been doing something I shouldn't have been doing and got chastised by him, and I took it hard. I remember I went back to the room, and it's quite a long time ago, and I don't remember exactly the sequences of it, but I practically became physically ill in the sense that I think it was just embarrassment and didn't want to go out in public. And I remember I was laying in bed, and it was the next day, and there was a Guru Puj going on. And I remember one thing. I was in the washroom one day, and Sudama Maharaj came in, and he said to me, because there was this morning walk, and I was always up there on that morning walk with him on the roof, getting a rose, taking off the thorns on the side, cleaning it for him every morning, butting in front of the sannyasis, I think I was agitating people too, because I was really, trying to be there and just being on that morning walk. So I stopped showing up on the morning walk. And I think the first morning Prabhupada said, "Where's Mr. Brazil?" And then he started chastising me again when I wasn't there. Oh, he thinks he's the king, and Sudama Maharaj was telling me this in the bathroom. He says, "Boy, are you getting the mercy?" And I was thinking, mercy? Man, I am getting, I'm just waiting for Krishna to breathe me back inside again. It was like it was over for me. I was at rock bottom. You came there, you want to do something, you've been preaching, opening centers, and you come and you want the guru to be happy with you, and I am literally getting yelled at worse than my dad used to do, in front of everything dear to me in the universe, and it was hard, and so I was literally laying in bed in that room down the hall from him. Guru Puja was going on downstairs, or I heard the greeting the deities, and then Hari Sori Prabhu shows up in the room, and he goes, "Prabhupada wants you at Guru Puja." And then I thought, oh no. I thought it couldn't get any worse, and now I have him, looking for me in the building, and I'm thinking, what, I just didn't know what to think. But I got ready and went down to I did what I was told. I immediately took a quick shower, got my dhoti on, went down to the temple room, and Guru Puja just started, right? And I hid behind Guru Das, who was, a good size then. And it was at the back, and the temple room was full. And Guru Kripa Prabhu, I remember he grabbed the mridanga, and he was just going to start leading Guru Puja. And he had just hit the drum, and Shri Guru. And I heard Prabhupada stopped the kirtan, right? And then, the devotees, it opened up. And there was this direct channel between me and Srila Prabhupada. And he pointed at me and he said to Guru Kripa, let him lead. He likes to chant. And so, at that moment, I just melted, and that was a very emotional morning program for me. So I think it was the next day that I went up to his room and asked if I could go back to Brazil, and that's when he let me go. And during this time, and during these conversations that I had with him in the evenings, he had said to me, you should be in India, it's good for you here. And one funny thing he said to me was, because he knew I was young and passionate, and the sannyasi thing, that ended real quick. I think the first thing he said to me when I got to Mayapur, so you want to take sannyas or do you want to get married? So I knew he knew, and at that moment I'd already resigned from the idea.
Then another time, I was alone with Srila Prabhupada talking to him about marriage. It was the day after that sannyas incident, and he let me come in and have private darshan. And he wanted to talk to me about the system of marriage. Well, I asked him, I said, Prabhupada, can you tell me about married life? And he said, when the girl is 8, she is betrothed to a husband, and the family has already worked everything out. They come from the same social strata, astrological compatibility, everything's worked out. He said then from 8 till 12, 14, she would go every day to her husband's house, and his mother would train her on how to take care of her son, the way he liked his food cooked, etc., etc. He said then as soon as she attained puberty, they would have sex life. He said, and she would never look at another man the rest of her life. He said, that is marriage. He said, anything else, I do not know.
We were in Hawaii at the Honolulu temple, and I was making deities. And he had spent a great deal of time explaining how he wanted the Gornitai deities made, and there was a devotee sculptor there, one of his disciples who was a sculptor. And he gave us elaborate instructions of what to do. And after all of his elaborate instructions, the sculptor devotee asked, my wife would like to make silk. But in order to make silk, you have to kill the silkworms. So is this okay? And so Srila Prabhupada, I don't actually recall what he said about the silk. But after this devotee left, he expressed that he was annoyed because that he was giving one instruction, and next, instead, there was a talk of making silk, and he said these Western disciples, they are so creative. Next, they will be asking me if they can kill cows to make mridangas.
There was one morning the devotees were complaining to me about the diet, and that they wanted more fruit and more. These were the American, European, the Westerners, and they were saying, look, because the diet in Vrindavan at the time was chapatis and khichdi in the morning, and at lunch it was chapati, dal, rice, and I think a sabji. So they were thinking, look, we're getting, we need to get some fruit and some other things. So, but you don't, I had already learned you don't change anything to start, right? I wasn't going there. I wasn't ruining a good thing. And so I went to Prabhupada, and I said, Srila Prabhupada, the devotees are requesting that, you know, they want some fruit and some other things in the diet. He says, Prabhupada said to me, we're grain eaters. He said, humans are grain eaters. If they want to eat fruit, then that's all they should eat. So don't change it. So I didn't, that was as far as that went. We're grain eaters. I was happy because I just loved, the chapatis and khichdi in Vrindavan were the best. You know, you had fresh, hot chapatis, just a little burnt, and the khichdi was, the prasadam was delicious in Vrindavan.
Srila Prabhupada gave classes each morning in the Frederick Street Temple and would always ask for questions at the end of the class. But he wanted questions that were relevant. One morning, I wanted to hear the story of Lord Chaitanya falling in the water. It wasn't really relevant to the class, so I was kind of shy about asking it. But anyway, I raised my hand and I asked, I said, well, this isn't really relevant, but could you please tell the story about Lord Chaitanya falling into the water? And Prabhupada went into ecstasy. I didn't know what was going on. He became totally quiet for about 5 minutes. And I was like, oh gosh, what have I done wrong now? I was really worried. And then he came out and he said, yes. And he told the story of Lord Chaitanya falling in the water. And afterwards, all the devotees were saying, didn't you see there were tears running down his face? Tears were coming down, and he was completely in ecstasy. And I marveled on that, and I began to see that here he's in the Western world, and Western children, we were just like children to him, were asking him about Lord Chaitanya, and it gave him great pleasure. It gave him great joy.
Now, from the ride from L.A. to Laguna Beach, Jayatirtha drove with Prabhupada. Prabhupada and maybe, I don't know who else was in the car. I wasn't in the car going to Laguna Beach. Anyhow, Jayatirtha was falling asleep the whole way. And Prabhupada wasn't going to let him drive from Laguna Beach to San Diego. No way. So Jayatirtha approaches me that I should drive the car with Prabhupada. I think it was a Mercedes. Anyhow, so I was like really feeling this is really great, and I was feeling like really, yeah, this is really great. This is a rare opportunity. I was going to be in the car with just Jayatirtha, and I think maybe it was Brahmananda or maybe it was Tamal Krishna Goswami. Anyhow, can't remember. But in those days, we hardly slept. I mean, to stay awake in Bhagavatam class, I know the only way I ever stayed awake is I exercised my temple president privilege and fanned Prabhupada the whole time so I could stand. That was how I did it. So anyhow, so I was just as tired as everybody else. We were on the road. And so we're traveling, and it's not far from Laguna Beach, San Diego, about an hour's drive. And my eyes are like, ugh, you know, and I'm like, oh, yeah. And I can't open the window or anything. So anyhow, so I'm looking in the mirror, and I'm looking in the mirror, and Prabhupada's got his head back, and Prabhupada's asleep. And a little bit later, I look in the mirror, and who else was sitting in the back seat with Prabhupada? I think it was Brahmananda. He was asleep. And then a little bit later, I look over to Jayatirtha, who was riding in the shotgun seat, and he's asleep. So I'm the only one awake in the whole car. And I'm going like this, and I'm holding my eyes, and I'm just dying to fall asleep. And I can't roll down the window. I can't turn on the radio. I can't chant japa aloud or anything. So I'm just like struggling with this whole thing, and I'm there because Prabhupada wanted to feel safe, and I'm doing this, and then I hear from the back of the seat of the car, and Prabhupada starts a kirtan. And then just everybody in the car gradually wakes up, and we had this really wonderful, just the four of us in the car, this kirtan on the way to San Diego. He saved me. I'd have probably fallen asleep, killed us all. But just at the, like at the darkest hour of when my eyes just wouldn't, just this soft clapping started in the back, and he started a kirtan.
When Prabhupada arrived in London one time, my father drove him from the airport to Bury Place. And my father had this white Jaguar Mark II, very nice car, and a smooth ride. It was like floating on air. Red leather seats and worn up. It was very nice. So Prabhupada sat in the front with my father, and I sat in the back with Pradumna and Shamsunda, I believe. So we came down right near the, right alongside the British Museum. Is a 3-lane road that goes all the way down the side of the British Museum as you're going down towards Bury Place at Holborn. And there's a hospital on one side and the British Museum on the other. And there's no pavement, there's just 3 lanes of road straight down there, so nowhere to go. And we were in the middle lane, and there were 2 red double-decker buses in the outside lanes. And as we were coming up on them, they closed in on us. And they almost closed right in on the car. It was very dangerous. And my father spontaneously screams, "Haribo!" and slammed down on the gas pedal, and the car just took off through the gap, and the buses pulled apart as we went through. And Prabhupada turned to my father and he beamed at him. And years later, my father wrote me a letter and he said, "Remember when I was driving Swamiji from the airport and those buses were closing in on us?" He said, "And I screamed, 'Hari Bol.'" He said, "and the buses parted just like the waves of the Red Sea parted for the Lord." So it was very nice because my father, he equated that experience of the buses parting when he screamed Hari Bol to the parting of the Red Sea, which was, for me, something special.
One very significant thing happened in Boston in 1968. We had a new Back to Godhead, and it had it was in May, because we were in Boston in May of '68. This particular Back to Godhead had an ad on the back cover. It looked very slick, at least graphics for those days, and it had a picture of Prabhupada, black and white, and said, "This man changed the world." It looked pretty slick. Prabhupada called me in his room and handed it to me and said, "Look at this." And I was like, "Okay, I'm looking at it. What's wrong with it?" And he said, "This is very bad. This is very serious. The spiritual master should never be referred to as a man. This is the beginning of fall down. This consciousness to view the spiritual master as an ordinary man, as a man, to even call him a man, this is the beginning of fall down. Call Rai Rama." Rai Rama was responsible, I think, Rai Rama, Jayadvaita, there were several in Boston at that time. Rai Rama was in charge, I believe. I'm not really sure of the person responsible for it, but I think it was Rai Rama. In any case, that's not the issue. The issue is that Prabhupada was very, very seriously affected by this. And his explanation was that one should never, ever refer to or consider the spiritual master on the level of a man.
Remember one day, though, he called me. It was Mangal Arti, and it was nice. And I was walking down the path on my way to the temple room, and I was singing Jasomati Nandana, kind of, it was happy-go-lucky mood, right? Which was, when you're with Prabhupada, that's the mood, happy. And I was singing, and I heard him from his room ask Jagadish, "Is that Mahavir?" and he said, "Tell him to come in." So I kind of quickly, went into Srila Prabhupada's room, and he started talking to me. He goes, he said, "Where in the world are there rivers like the Ganges, the Krishna, the Jamuna. He says, India has the most beautiful rivers. He says, there's only one other place in the world that has a beautiful river. And he said, the St. Lawrence. And it stunned me. I'm from Canada. And I said, I don't know if he's just saying that to make me feel good. I don't even know if he knows I'm from Canada. But he said, that he mentioned the St. Lawrence, you know, that he thought that that was a, you know, of all the he named all the rivers in India. And then he said one other place, the St. Lawrence. So, and then we talked about water, and he was talking about how and I think he did a lot of this for my benefit, so that I would get the real picture of India, not get fried and burnt with the way India is, like the culture shock. He was talking about cleanliness. And he was talking about how all the local people, their dhotis look dirty. He said, but actually none of those dhotis go 12 hours without being at least washed with water. He said, but because there's so much soil in the water that, you know, they don't use Tide, you know, or bleach, that the dhotis would stay with that kind of reddish or whatever color they had them. He said, but they were always clean. So, you know, he used to talk about the water and sometimes those the rivers.
When we were in Montreal, Srila Prabhupada had asked the London Yatra to go to London and open a temple. That consisted of Malati and her husband Shamsundar, and Jamuna and Guru Das, and Mukunda and Janaki. So they flew from San Francisco to Montreal to see Srila Prabhupada before going to London. Malati had just had a baby, Saraswati. And of course they came to see Srila Prabhupada, and Malati's baby was on her hip. She was always dancing with the baby. I was always amazed, you know, legs and arms were kind of flopping. The baby was on her hip when she would be dancing in kirtan. And when they came to see Srila Prabhupada took the baby, little baby Saraswati, held her up over his head and said, so, do you remember me? I'm your old friend. And, of course, Srila Prabhupada indicated on many occasions that these children are so special. These children are children that have been brought in to spread Lord Chaitanya's movement, that have come from higher places, demigod lokas or higher dimensions, or who knows where they came from, but they've been brought in by Srila Prabhupada's request to spread Lord Chaitanya's mission. And I think one of the most important things that we can do in our lives is to let the children know this, how much Srila Prabhupada counted on them, how much he cared about them, and how important they are to him. Whatever has happened is unfortunate, but this is a very important part. He loved the children very, very much. He taught them, he wanted to teach them everything. When I was in Dallas, many years later, he was there for several days in Dallas. He gave lectures. Dayananda was the headmaster at the time. He gave lectures. Every lecture was about teaching them with love, disciplining them only with love. If you love them, they will respond. They will want to do things properly. Not with a heavy hand, but with love. Those lectures, I'm sure, we recorded and are available.
Once I was with Prabhupada and we were talking about my family because he got to know my mother and father, and you know, they visited him a few times. And Prabhupada said that, he said, because you are a devotee, he said, 28 generations of your family will be liberated. And I said, well, what do you mean by liberated, Prabhupada? And he said, that means they will become devotees in their next life. I said, wow. I said, does that mean just my immediate family, like my mother and father and brothers and sisters, or does it mean my extended family, aunts and uncles? And he said, no, extended family. He said, everybody, aunts, uncles, everybody. 28 generations of your whole family become devotees.
While living with Srila Prabhupada in Los Angeles in 1968, we did the drawing for the Bhagavad Gita, and we also did the drawings for teachings of Lord Chaitanya. The drawings for teachings of Lord Chaitanya, they took quite a while. There were 5 of them. Srila Prabhupada supervised every aspect of them. There was a picture of the Nawab coming to visit the Goswamis, the Rupa and Sanatan. There was a picture of Jagannath with Lord Chaitanya in the Jagannath temple. At that time, I had no idea what the inside of Jagannath temple looked like. Srila Prabhupada described how it was dark, and the pujari is sitting up on the altar, and he's handing down garlands. He described the interior. So I did the painting, or the drawing, according to Srila Prabhupada's descriptions. Later, when those 5 drawings were removed from the book, Srila Prabhupada was totally disgusted. He said, why they have removed these drawings from this book? Why they have removed them? And he had personally overseen them. And so far as the other illustrations, the illustrations to Krishna book, one of his statements about that, when he saw that they had been removed, was, why they have removed these paintings? Those paintings, those early paintings were full of bhakti. They were full of bhakti. The mood was very special, even though the technical quality of the paintings might not have been perfect.
One particular lesson, I guess you would call it, experience that I had with Prabhupada that till today I use it in my business, I use it in management, something that is it's just so overwhelmingly important. My wife was out in his garden, and I was fixing the garden, and she was out there, taking care of the plants and stuff, and we were talking, and I was speaking in Portuguese with her. So Prabhupada yelled out through his window for me to come inside. So I went inside the room, and he said, first he asked me, are you speaking Mexican? I said, no, Prabhupada, Portuguese. And then he said to me, look, you Americans, you ruin everything. He said, one of you come and you change everything the other one did. And then you go away and another one comes and he changes everything you did, and he goes away and another one of you come and changes. He said, stop changing everything. He said, just save it. Don't change it, just save it. And that stuck in my brain since that day, that from now on, wherever I go and whatever I see and whatever needs to be fixed, I don't change it. It's like I can hear, it's like as if it was yesterday, Don't change it, just take what's there, and just make it better. Improve on the work that's already been put there, right? And make it, you can improve it, you can make it better, but just don't go in and change it. And it was funny how he said that our nature is we just come in, just rip away everything the other guy did and do our thing. And so that was a very beneficial lesson for me.
So in Montreal, it was Srila Prabhupada's birthday, and I decided to make a cake for him and celebrate it like Westerners do. So I baked a nice 2-layer cake, frosted it, and put some candles on it, not 72, but a bunch of candles, and lit them all, and then brought it into his room. And as I brought it into his room, his eyes were big, and he said, oh, he was very surprised to see me carrying a flaming cake. So I put it on the altar and offered it, and then I brought it over to him and said, Srila Prabhupada, this is how we celebrate birthdays in America, and so if you blow out all the candles, you can make a wish. And so he blew out all the candles, but you don't have to tell anybody what you wish for. And so he blew out all the candles, and then I said, well, you don't have to tell anybody. He says, well, I wish only for Krishna's service. Only for Krishna's service. And then, of course, we enjoyed the cake. Western style.
I appreciated Prabhupada's strength. That, never giving up, fighting for Krishna. I think that one of my, fondest thoughts of Prabhupada is when the anti-cult movement was really prominent and it was really giving us a lot of trouble. And Prabhupada was in New York, and his statement was that I wanted to fight for Krishna with my last breath. So that to me was very, very, very significant and important. That strength that Prabhupada exhibited, that he never give up, no matter what the circumstances. And I felt that Prabhupada was a real, warrior. Prabhupada was a real warrior for Krishna. He would do anything for Krishna, whatever it took. He wouldn't be, it wouldn't be a setback. It didn't matter. It was all, and I think that strength was exhibited from the first time he came to America, before he came to America, how to get here, in Jaladutta, that strength, So most people would have turned back than going through in New York in the early days. And then, of course, he was such a great, he had so much strength that he had this vision of so many temples, so many devotees, and he would never give up, no matter what the circumstances. So, yeah, I personally appreciate Srila Prabhupada for his undaunting devotion and strength, to the instruction of his spiritual master and, of course, to Krishna.
Krishna Kirtana Gana Nartana Prabhu